Hey y'all, Rob the American here. I am back in London, and this time we're going back to Burlington Arcade. We're going to meet the guys at Somlo London, the vintage watch guys. And this time our focus is specifically Omega. The history of Omega, we're going to talk about that and look at the history through their watches. So stick around. We are back in Somlo, and sitting next to me, you'll recognize this face, is Daniel Somlo. Daniel, thank you again for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Well, listen, we really appreciated when we did the first video. It got the reviews were very positive, and so people said we want Daniel, we want Daniel. I think they want you more than they want me, and I can live with that. All right. So y'all, I contacted Daniel again. We've been talking, and I asked him if we could focus on Omega, and specifically the history of Omega. And I think a lot of people know Omega because their dads or their granddads had Omega. And I'm just curious to find out more of how it kind of came to be. So Daniel has kindly agreed to kind of give us the story of Omega. Let's talk about Omega as the brand. Can you kind of give us a bit about the very beginning?
Of course, yeah. So it started off in 1848. It's a much older company than most people think.
God, that's much older than Rolex.
Much older than Rolex.
Oh, oops!
Yeah.
I said the R word. I said the R word. We won't mention them again. All right.
Yeah, no, they predated Rolex and a number of other companies, but they started out then. They weren't called Omega. It was started by a man named Louis Brandt. It was a small company, and they used
Where?
In Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland.
In Switzerland, okay.
And they started off as sort of small manufacturer, started growing, started becoming bigger. He passed it on to his sons, so it became Louis Brandt Brothers, Louis Brandt Frère.
Okay, so it was family.
Family.
Right.
They expanded again, and they moved to the current location of Omega, BL or BN, depending on what language you're speaking. Okay. And the next major sort of milestone was 1894, if I'm getting my dates right.
So that's basically almost 50 years in.
Almost 50 years in. Right. So they came up with, it was still called Louis Brandt Frère at this point, and they came up with a pocket watch movement, a 19-line caliber, which is an old sort of system of measuring the size of movement. Which was sort of supposed to be the ultimate piece of machinery in terms of watchmaking. Okay. So that's why they called it the Omega caliber. You know, it was the end of discussion.
Was that the first time the word Omega had entered the company?
Yeah.
And so it came. So the Omega, the word Omega came from a specific movement.
A specific movement, that was pocket watch movement. Which they then changed the name of it was so successful they changed the name of the brand to Omega in 1903, I think.
Wow. That's fascinating. I did not know that.
Yeah, and the key to the success of this movement was two things. Firstly, they were early adopters of the keyless and setting crown. So being able to use the crown to wind up the watch and set the watch just from the crown rather than using keys.
So previously that
it had been done. I think it was Adrian Philippe from Patek Philippe who actually invented the keyless winding and setting, but they were an early adopter of it, and they mass produced it.
Right.
And they also were big sort of proponents in mass production of watches, so interchangeability of parts. So whereas before you'd have a watchmaker would assemble a watch from start to finish, and each part had to be more or less tailored to each watch, just for precision and for it to work properly. Now you'd have, you could have a bag of bits, and just any watchmaker could just put a new bit in and it would work. And that revolutionized the way that watches were kind of manufactured.
Early 1900s, the company becomes Omega, the Omega that we know.
Yeah.
And then where does it go from there? Because I know at some point Omega has ceased to be a family business and it's part of the Swatch Group.
Yes. Yeah.
And how did that kind of go from Omega as a family to...
So the Swatch Group the Swatch Group sort of acquiring Omega, that happened much later. That was 1970s.
Oh, right, 80s. Okay.
That was after the quartz crisis. And, essentially, the Japanese mass-produced sort of inexpensive quartz watches, sort of devastating the Swiss watch industry. And that was Nicholas Hayek Sr., who was the... He was the CEO of Swatch.
Okay.
But at the time, he was just a businessman.
Right.
And he bought Omega, bought all of these other companies, and put them together into what became the Swatch Group.
Right.
And he had Swatch, the company, and Swatch in itself saved the Swiss watch industry.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when this early Swatches, and they were like the thing. They exploded. I forget what year. Do you remember when? I want to say it was 80s, maybe.
Yeah, early 80s.
Yeah. And you used to see them everywhere, and everybody had a Swatch.
Well, Swatch. So the Swatch was meant to be their answer to the Japanese sort of Casios and things like that. And Swatch actually stands for second watch. That's where it came from.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it was meant to be your second watch. That was kind of your inexpensive but accurate, mass-produced, cheap, but still made to a Swiss watch standard.
Oh, that's cool. I had never heard that. If I ever get on a game show and they ask that question, I might have to split the money with you. Okay, well,
I'll take you.
We'll worry about that when it happens. We're going to do basically a watch chronology of the brand from early to more modern. All right, what are we going to start with, Daniel?
Okay, let's start with this one. This is the earliest Omega we've got at the moment. It's
Wow.
a 1911 pocket watch. Very nice, simple, time-only watch, but the real standout feature of this one is actually the case.
Oh, look at that. Oh my gosh. Wow.
The engraving is absolutely wonderful.
What is it?
It's a sort of just a floral kind of motif.
Hopefully y'all
But it
can
looks
see
like
that.
it was kept in a box practically for its whole life. There's, gold is quite a soft material, and it tends to rub quite badly or get sort of softened and polished just from normal use.
Okay.
But this one is really, really crisp.
And you said 1911.
1911.
Wow.
Next up, we've got this. This is from the late 30s. It's a caliber 33.3, one of the earlier ones.
Okay. What can you tell us about this?
So this one, it's a very big watch for the period. I think it's about 39 millimeters.
Okay. God, that would be considered modern at this point.
It does not look unlike a modern watch in terms of size and sort of dimensions. But back then, this would have been outlandish and weird. Nobody would have worn watches this big unless you had to. And the sort of person who would have bought a watch like this is somebody who needed to time things.
Right. And what's going on with the dial? There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, so it was a technical chronograph with a multi-scale. So this has got a tachometer, but the tachometer actually goes for, I think it's 4 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, so you've got a sort of sequential rings going further and further inside the dial.
Right.
For each minute of tachometer. And then if you look at the minute recorder, the little sub-dial, it should be on the 3 o'clock,
Okay.
I think. You'll have a couple of tiny little sort of coloured markers for the first couple of minutes to show you which scale to look at. This is a 1948 chronometer. So in that sort of period, the end of the 40s, Omega were making a series of incredibly accurate versions of their sort of 30mm caliber, which was their very famous, very well used caliber that they had at the time.
Okay.
But this one's a specific chronometer reference. These were sent off for time trials, and they won awards, the then equivalent to COSC.
Certification.
Things like that. And they were some of the most accurate watches made at the time.
Wow.
And this one, it's just been kind of left to its own devices, which is really lovely. So you get that gorgeous patina over it.
All right, Daniel, what's next?
Next, so we have probably one of the first sort of relevant watches today, I'd say. This one is Seamaster.
Okay.
And the Seamaster was the first of the sort of named sub-brands of Omega. Now probably one of the most well-known.
Sure.
And
what year was this?
that one is from 1955, but they came out in 1948 for the London Olympics, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. And it was at the time, even though this looks very much like a dress watch, this would have been your go anywhere, do anything watch. You know, they were water resistant, they were shock resistant, they were based off those sort of famous 30mm calibers, which were very hardy. Automatic, you know, this sort of watch predated diving watches.
Wow.
So this was what you used.
God, when you think of Seamaster today, it's nothing like this.
No, absolutely not. And we'll come to what Seamasters today are more.
Have become. Interesting how the evolution of it.
Yeah, but it's a great. I mean, this was the genesis. This kind of watch, and it would have looked very similar to this one.
And so this is an important watch in Omega's history.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, there you go, folks. Don't take this for granted. Oh, very good, excellent. What's next? Oh, I know what's coming. Yeah, this is one of my favorites too. When I think of Omegas, like classic Omegas, like that your dad had or your granddad had, this is the style that comes to mind.
And this is just an absolutely brilliant example of one as well. This was the culmination of everything that sort of led up to this point. 1952, the Omega Constellation was released, and it was their first sort of line, like proper produced line of automatic chronometer rated watches. This was the flagship. This was the most expensive watch that Omega made at the time.
Do you have any idea what the retail price would have been?
I don't know, back in 1952, but it would have been probably
a lot for that time. That time.
And then this one's from 59, so it's a little bit later than that. But,
okay.
You know, practically speaking, it was very sort of similar with those kind of Art Deco inspired markers and things like that. This one has got a date on it, but this one's didn't.
And the Pie-Pan dial.
The Pie-Pan dial.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course.
For those of
the very first Constellations didn't have it, but it was released soon after they were the brand sort of was established.
Okay.
I think it was the second reference that had the first Pie-Pan dials. But it was Omega being very forward with their kind of designs, because even in the 50s, very few companies actually had dedicated design departments. Most people just had, you know, they used cases from a case maker, they used dials from a dial maker, and hands from a hand maker.
Sure.
So a lot of watches pre sort of early 50s look very similar, you'll notice. But Omega decided, no, we're going to have a dedicated design department, and this was
all in-house.
The Seamaster was the first one they kind of worked on, this one was the second, and you can tell it looks nothing like any other watch that they made at the time.
And the Pie-Pan, the word itself, wasn't an official. They didn't call it that. It was.
No, that's something that's been adopted. By
it was a nickname that kind of came, and hopefully that y'all can see. How would you describe the Pie-Pan dial?
It's I'm gonna get this word wrong. A dodecahedral, not 12-sided. It's a 12-sided dial. It's kind of domed in the middle.
Right.
And it kind of comes down on the side with these 12 facets.
Where the markers are.
Where the markers are, and that's sort of given the name of a pie-pan. It kind of looks like an upside-down pie-pan shape.
Right. For those of you who make pies, because I know we all do, when you have that pie-pan and you turn it upside down, that's what this looks like. But this is, to me, the quintessential classic Omega.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, this was one of the best watches made in that period. Just outright.
You'll get no argument from me. I'm looking at this next one. It looks a bit funky. we definitely, funky is not the right word. Maybe groovy.
Groovy, yeah. Groovy is a good one for it.
And what is this?
So towards the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, watch design went funky.
Okay.
Groovy. And this is what's called a soccer timer. And it's a Seamaster Chronograph that was specifically made for football referees.
Oh, that's specific. That's specific. When you say football referees, you mean soccer.
Like
soccer,
yeah.
Okay.
So that's why you've got this really unusual kind of exotic coloured dial. And on the minute counters, they're actually divided into sort of 15-minute divisions to sort of aid referees so they could time halves and things like that more easily.
And that the subdials with these specific colors, unusual colors, is that part of that whole?
It's part of that kind of range just to kind of help it be more legible, because, you know, as a referee, you need to very quickly see sort of halves and quarters of football.
But was this sold to the public, or was it only sold to people in the football world?
It was sold to the public. It was marketed towards football referees. We're only inching forward in date a little bit, to 1957, but that was when Omega released their first sort of proper tool watch, sports watch sort of looking watches. So we have this one here, which is one of the original Seamaster 300s. So this was their sort of first successful kind of tool watch, dive watch sort of thing.
Okay.
You know, they'd made water resistant watches prior to that, but this one was the first one that was really successful.
What year did you say? Sorry.
So this one is from 1958, but it was released in 57, so it's still a very early.
Okay.
And it's got the characteristic broad arrow hands that Omega is known for. It's automatic, and it's got the rotating bezel at the top as well, which is a Bakelite bezel. That kind of spins around like that.
Very good.
And yeah, so these were, you know, hardy tool watches, and 1957 was the year that the Seamaster 300, like this one, came out. The Speedmaster came out.
Oh, the Trilogy is
Trilogy,
right.
And the Railmaster. So those were the three.
So this is one of the original Trilogy.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's something that I've learned recently, and I just did a video within the last couple of weeks on the new Railmasters that have just come out this year, and then I did a minor history of it and was introduced to the Trilogy. Right.
So yeah, this is one of the three.
And I've been told that if you get the Trilogy, the Railmaster, Seamaster, and Speedmaster, all the originals, that's worth quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. They were never made in big numbers. I mean, I know the Speedmaster, the very first Speedmasters, they only made about 1,000 of the first programs, which is a tiny number.
Oh my God!
General production.
So collectors would be hot for those.
Everyone's going to recognize.
Okay.
So Speedmaster.
There we go.
And this one is 105.003, known as the Ed White.
Okay.
And historically, it's probably one of the most important Speedmasters. Even though the Speedmaster was originally released as a racing chronograph, this one was the one that NASA actually awarded the sort of right to be the first watch worn on the moon. This was the one that they chose as the official sort of equipment for the astronauts.
And this is actually from, what year is this?
So that one is 1964, I believe, or 65.
Okay.
And they made them from 63 right the way to 69, because they released it at the same time as they released the professional case, which is the more, you know, familiar case to us with the Lyra Lugs asymmetric case. So obviously, as you can understand, they had a hard time selling the old style case next to the new ones, because everyone wanted the new ones.
And can you briefly just say Ed White? We know that nickname. Who was that?
So he was one of the astronauts on the Apollo missions, and also Gemini, and he was around sort of the NASA space program right since the beginning, actually, more or less. And he tragically died testing for Apollo 1. And he would wear one of these watches. It was his issued watch.
So it became associated with him, and hence the name kind of stuck.
Correct. And he was the first person to first American astronaut to perform an EVA wearing his
EVA?
Yeah, so extravehicular activity. So he actually went outside of the spacecraft into space with his watch.
Oh, right. So, I remember they did a whole bunch of testing, and they brought in a bunch of different watch brands and tested. I know from my limited research that Omega was the only one that basically survived what they threw at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And these tests, if you read about them, they were brutal. Like, you'd be surprised that watches could survive them, because they couldn't test it as a piece of equipment that would be worn on a wrist. They had to test it as a piece of equipment that's on the spacecraft.
Right.
So it had to be subjected to all of the sort of rigors and impacts and temperature variations that any piece of equipment would. and it was the only one that survived.
Wow. All right, so that's y'all's homework, right? Is to research the Ed White Speedmaster. Our final watch, we're jumping up a little bit, but from what you've told me before and what we spoke about a little bit last time, this is actually considered vintage.
Yes, so that is a Seamaster Professional. This one's from 2005.
Okay.
But it was released in the sort of late 90s, and this is the sort of Bond watch for Tomorrow Never Dies, the Bond film. It was Pierce Brosnan's first automatic Seamaster.
You see, what's his face, Daniel Craig, at Hollywood functions and stuff, wearing watches, even watches that haven't been officially released, and you've got all the eagle eyes looking at them going.
Incredible piece of marketing.
Yeah,
really, really clever.
It has definitely paid off. We're in 2025 now. Where do you see Omega now? What are your thoughts on today's present and future Omega?
Something I've noticed with a lot of Omega's releases in the past few years as well, especially, is that they've really started taking a good look at their historical catalogue and trying to be a bit more faithful to the watches rather than just using them as sort of inspiration.
Okay.
And I think that's actually really worked in their favour. Like you mentioned, the new Railmaster release,
right? Which I'm a big fan of.
Great looking watches.
I don't have any data on this, but I think guys are kind of not done with, but the Apple watches and the smart watches, they have no soul in a certain sense. They're great, and you can check emails and all of that kind of stuff, but just to have a proper watch, and you can have a good dive watch, and you can have a nice dress watch that you can use for to go out and all of that. I do think that's all making a comeback. You can have both. You can have a smart watch, and you can have a nice mechanical watch at the same time, and have a Seamaster or a Speedmaster. And I think that's, when I see that on guys' wrists, it's just so much cooler than some anonymous.
I mean, things like smartwatches and Apple watches, they are the new tool watch. It's like it's a device to help you day-to-day life, whereas old watches and actual mechanical watches, nobody needs one anymore because everyone's.
Oh, I need one. I need one.
Need is maybe not the right word.
Okay.
But it's just for the enjoyment of it.
Right.
So you can really, when you're wearing a watch like that, it's not because you need it to tell the time. It's because you need it because it's. You're making a
statement, and I think that history and that is well worth it. I think the watch does make the man. All right, Daniel, listen, thank you so much for having me in again and showing all this and sharing your knowledge about Omega. I know I've asked you this. What's the best way for folks to find out more about you and Somlo?
Best way, you can contact us on Instagram. We're Somlo London, Somlo_London. We are online, www.somlo.com.
Okay.
Or the best way is to just come in and say hi.
Definitely, y'all come in. If you're in the UK, come on into London, into Burlington Arcade. It's worth it. And if you're not, make a special trip to come to London, to come to Burlington Arcade, to come to Somlo London, and see my man Daniel himself. All right, Daniel, listen, thanks again.
Thank you, Rob.
All right, y'all, that's going to be it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed our time here at Somlo and our overview of Omega. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel and leave a comment down below. And if you come on in, you know the drill. Be sure and tell them that Rob the American sent you. And my Instagram is Rob the American. That's Rob_the_American. Give that a follow and join me again for some more Watch Talk. Y'all take good care.